Welcome to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional Facebook page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. You can also find all her cool resources at natashahelfer.com. The information shared on this program is informational and should not be considered therapy. This podcast addresses many topics around mental health and sexuality and may not be suitable for minors. Some topics may elicit a trigger or emotional response, so please care for yourself accordingly. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or feelings of Natasha Helfer or the Natasha Helfer Podcast. We provide a platform for open and diverse discussions, and it is important to recognize that different perspectives may be shared. We encourage our listeners to engage in critical thinking and form their own opinions. The intro and outro music for these episodes is by Otter Creek. Thank you for listening.
I'm super excited to have a wonderful guest today from the Rape Recovery Center. I'll tell you about her more in a second. I just wanted to give a few just announcements about some things that are happening at Symmetry Counseling. We have our Faith Transitions support group that happens every Wednesday night. First Wednesdays of the month are in person and also hybrid, and the rest of the Wednesdays of the month are online. So pretty much everybody can engage with us regardless of where you are. And that's if you're going through a faith transition, especially, doesn't really matter when, but you're wanting support. We go through a year-long curriculum. I also have a religious trauma group coming up, which will be 7 weeks long, ethical non-monogamy group, as well as a mixed orientation marriage group. So if you're interested in any of those types of support groups, they're usually support educational groups. Again, they're online, so anybody can join me from anywhere. Please contact Symmetry Counseling and they can get you registered for that. Okay, without further ado, I want to introduce Jennilyn Potter. She is the Tooele Advocacy Coordinator for the Utah Rape Recovery Center here in Utah, and she has over 6 years of diverse experience in professional communications, including public speaking, tour guiding, marketing, and comprehensive event planning. She thrives in collaborative environments, effectively engaging with individuals from various backgrounds in high-pressure situations. Her passion for community service led her to work in victim advocacy. By connecting with survivors and listening to their impactful stories, Jennilyn strives to raise awareness about the critical issues of sexual assault, specifically in the Tooele Valley, although we will be talking about Utah in general. And of course, all states have similar resources. In case you're listening from some other state, we want to also offer some basic awareness, and this while promoting preventative measures. She's committed to fostering strong partnerships with local organizations, ensuring that victims receive crucial support and unwavering security through the Rape Recovery Center. We are so excited to have you and to help your organization get visibility and help, lots of people understand what you have to offer so that they can access the resources, many resources that I know you have. So welcome to the show, Jennilyn. So happy to have you.
Thanks, Natasha. So happy to be here. It's seriously an honor. And so thank you so much. It's something that, we're just trying to make sure Utah is more aware, because I don't know about you, but I feel like moving to Utah and just kind of seeing the numbers, it's just something that I don't think a lot of people are really, unfortunately, aware of. And so we're just trying to get more education and, let people know that there is help and available and that we believe victims.
Yeah. Okay. So you moved here to Utah. How long ago and from where?
So I am originally from Washington State, Spokane, Washington specifically. And since I've been married to my husband, we've been married for 14 years, but we've moved all over probably every 2 years since our marriage, just through, he's an attorney, so he went to law school and then different jobs. Then we were a military family. He was a JAG officer in the military. So we moved around, and then we were in Montana. And then we came out of the Air Force and he got a job in Salt Lake City. And that was 3 years ago. So we've been here for, it's been 3 years now.
Okay. All right. So you seem to allude to the numbers maybe here in Utah being a little bit more numerous, maybe and and I don't know if this is the first time you're kind of getting into this type of work so that you'd be more aware of statistics. I know that obviously statistics around rape and sexual assault are higher probably than everybody would guess everywhere. But tell me a little bit about Utah in particular. What statistics can you share with us, and maybe what would people be surprised to know?
Absolutely. So, also just kind of a little bit of a background. Yeah, I have a communications background mainly. I did marketing as well. And I wasn't necessarily my plan to get into advocacy work, but when we moved to Utah, this has been the first place, again, like I said, we moved every 2 years. So we've been here over 3 years. So this is the place we've lived the longest in our marriage. And kind of during that time, my kids were getting older and they were all in school. And so I started looking for some more volunteer work, kind of thinking about going back to work. And I came across an ad at our local police department to do volunteer work for victim advocacy. So I did that for almost a year before landing into the Rape Recovery Center. And it was during that time where I did just kind of discover how much of an issue, how big of an issue it is in Utah. We lead higher than the national average when it comes to rape. So that was something as a mother, especially, that it just really surprised me. I have family from Utah. This is the first time I've lived in Utah, but I've been to Utah most of my life. And, it just has this reputation of being very family friendly, which it is. It's a, wonderful place to live. My kids love growing up here. But when I heard that, it just kind of, set some alarm bells off. And it was just something that really made me want to help out in any way I could. And seeing, like I had mentioned, my husband's an attorney. So he had done in the Air Force, he was a prosecutor and defense work attorney. So he had dealt with lots of sexual assault cases. And so kind of just hearing those stories, victim stories, it was, again, just something that has just kind of been nonstop in my brain a little bit. And yeah, but in Utah, we lead higher than national average. And in Utah, it's 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men in Utah experience sexual violence of some kind in their lifetime. And that's huge. And so it just really was something that when I had heard about that and kind of seeing, well, what is it, kind of what's going on, and learning that, all the rape myths of thinking, oh, this only happens to the man in the bushes kind of a thing coming out, when really, unfortunately, what we're finding out is that the stats are showing that I believe it's 8 out of 10. Let me know if I'm mistaken with that. I think of victims know their perpetrator personally. So it's the people, unfortunately, that we are trusting and that we are thinking that, we're safe with, or we're letting our kids feel like our kids are safe with. So kind of, again, that feeling, and especially in Utah where, again, it's the family friendly idea. I'm out in Tooele County where it's a small county. So kind of, just small town thinking of, which is great. I'm a very big fan of small towns, and that's why we moved here. But kind of the idea of, I think trust goes really easy. And unfortunately, we just don't talk enough about what it means to do the prevention work, talk to our kids, talk to our loved ones, and say, make sure that you are having your boundaries and that you are staying safe.
Yeah. Okay. So the rates are higher here in Utah. That's surprising. I'm guessing from several factors. We're kind of a smaller population state. Like you're saying, there's a lot of like small towns and, what would I say, kind of what might feel like protected insular communities. Of course, it's also a state that has a primary religion associated with it, right? So the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is highly involved in, especially in rural communities, I would say. And I think a lot of people, I found this too, like when I lived in Kansas, which was also very evangelical and very Christian, that people just assume because we share Christian values or religious values that these kinds of things would be less likely to happen. And that does not end up to be the case in the statistics. So that's true, I think, of a lot of Bible Belt type states and, Book of Mormon Belt states, et cetera. So that's surprising. I think too, like maybe, like you're saying, Utah has been, especially Salt Lake City area has been, I think for the last 2 or 3 years has been ranked like, if not number one of the top places to raise a family. Is that?
Yes.
Does that
Yeah,
sound
I think you're right. Yeah, and yeah, you're right. I don't know what the number is, but I feel like, yeah, you're right. That just kind of came out, what was that last year? And that was something that came out too, where it's like, yeah, top, if, and you're right. I don't know if it was number one, but close to it if it wasn't number one of, yeah, top, and I want to say it was number one, but top places to raise families, which again, that is true. But again, we can't ignore these numbers of 1 in 3. And it's not saying 1 in 3 only in this certain population. It's not saying 1 in 3, only in the circumstances. It is 1 in 3 women and then 1 in 6 men in Utah. So it's, when you see that number, it's not just a certain demographic. It's not this only in a, scary neighborhood or, it's happening everywhere.
Yeah. Right off the bat, I guess I'd like to ask a little bit about how you language things and how you market your services, because I feel like a lot of people, when they see the word rape, a certain type of sexual assault comes to mind. And then maybe people who have dealt with either childhood sexual abuse, sexual molestation, sexual assault, like there's so much different language. For example, somebody who maybe is at a park with their child and runs across an exhibitionist who all of a sudden is showing their erection to children in the park or something along that line, but never had physical contact with anybody. They might not see that as rape, even though they see it as problematic, and they may not think then that the resources of your recovery center would apply to them. So do you want to speak a little bit to how you language things? Who are your services for? What kind of unwanted sexual behavior qualifies, quote unquote, for the resources of your center?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I want to say too, like one thing that a lot of people, and I know, so I started back in October with the Rape Recovery Center, so I haven't been with it very long. But one thing when I told people that I was going back to work, and especially when I say where I work and I say Rape Recovery Center, there is this immediate, like, you can just feel like tension. They don't really know how to respond. And yeah, and then I think you bring up a good point where when we talk about sexual assault, it is kind of this idea of it has to be, we're only speaking on rape, and just kind of what you just demonstrated, where there's all different types of sexual assault encounters where we don't necessarily maybe really highlight. But one thing that we talk about with our organization and why we call ourselves the Rape Recovery Center is, and this is a quote, I think, from a survivor, from a famous case in the United States, where she said, predators thrive in silence. So one thing that we talk about, especially when it comes to prevention, is we need to start shying away from talking about what actual sexual assault is. Say the word rape, say sexual assault, and then describe, again, like you were saying, all the in-betweens and kind of what that entails, and that it's not just this one case, that it can look in any different way. So we define that sexual assault as any unwanted sexual contact of any kind. So kind of what you're describing too. It's somebody can be showing you something, but if it's any kind of sexual contact, that, again, we talk about consent. So that's a huge thing that our organization is trying to get out there when it comes to prevention, feeling like Utah, we need to start shouting this and speak the words consent. We need to try to do what we can to prevent this and educate, especially the youth, but the community in general. But yeah, with that, any kind of sexual assault, it can include touching, fondling, like you just mentioned, indecent exposure, and it's a deliberate or repeated behavior. And so, yeah, we're just kind of talking about that. Consent is huge, right? And it's consent, it has to involve both parties. And I know you definitely can speak more about that as a therapist of sex. So yeah, like I think that's such a great point. It's just making sure. And I think there's a little bit of, with Utah especially, that I just don't know if maybe we just haven't spoken enough about it. But again, we're trying to make sure that we're not staying silent on this. And we just got to speak about it, and we got to get used to, and we got to get comfortable with using these things. Because if we are shying away from it and we're teaching our kids that it's uncomfortable to talk about, well, then our kids aren't going to talk to us about it. They're not going to come in, or even just a loved one. And they feel like and especially like we brought up, in a highly religious or conservative community that feels, like uncomfortable with talking about these things, that, again, you need to make sure that it's a comfortable thing to talk about, that we get away from feeling like we have to be silent. We can't be silent anymore about this.
So you're saying just even the language of rape is something that the overall folks that are advocating for this type of work are saying we just need to be more comfortable with that word. It's an uncomfortable word.
Yes.
We might hear that word and already like silence the radio or silence the TV or kind of get our children to not be present with that kind of language, but you're saying it's actually language that just needs to be said outright.
And in fact, so our organization started back in the 1970s, which when you think about, again, we kind of talked a little bit about where we are today with Utah. And especially when you think back, I mean, back to the 70s, but even just to the early 90s, when I think about how culture in general spoke about rape and sexual assault, it really has evolved, since then. We really have made a lot of strides, but we still are kind of at this place again, where it's like, we feel very uncomfortable speaking about it. And so just being able to say that, like we talk about any other crime, we don't shy away from speaking about that, speaking about manslaughter, you know what I mean? So it's kind of, we got to say that this is a crime and we got to quit being so shy about saying these words, because it's important, especially with prevention, to make sure that we are speaking about that, so that when something happens where it was, again, there was no consent, there was unwanted, any kind of sexual contact, especially, we talk about even we live in an online culture. There's online sextortion, there's online sexual abuse as well, where you don't even have to actually meet the person for it to happen. And if people are uncomfortable to talk about it, who are they going to share it with? They're not going to share it with anybody, and it's going to go unreported, and it's going to be something that they're not going to feel like they can deal with in their trauma and not know how to handle their trauma as well.
Okay, so I just want to be clear with the audience that the Rape Recovery Center, as far as I can understand, is a Utah-based organization. Is that correct? You have two offices, one in Salt Lake and one in Tooele.
Yes.
And it is meant to provide resources to anyone. It doesn't matter your biological sex or your gender identity, as far as somebody who feels like they've been exposed to unwanted sexual behavior of any kind, whether it's physical, emotional, verbal, etc. And I'm assuming you also don't care about the timeline. It's not just for people for which this has happened in the last month or two. Like, even if it happened to you when you were a child or 10 years ago, you can call and access resources at the Rape Recovery Center. Yes?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for emphasizing that, because, yeah, we do not turn anybody away. We are here for victims who have experience, either they can even just be from Utah. We get survivors who are even from Utah, but their sexual assault happened maybe in a different state. We still can help you. If you live in a different state, but your sexual assault happened in Utah, we can help you. So and like you said, it doesn't matter if it happened recently. We have survivors who it's been 10, 20 plus years, since their incident. And things that, because a lot of things, and I know that you could definitely speak more about this too, when it comes to trauma, that if you have trauma and you don't address it and you push it down, that it can just creep up. It can keep creeping up if you never address it. So we do have a lot of survivors who come and just realize I never really dealt with this. And yeah, we are here to help. And maybe I can go a little bit, I guess, into, because we do offer a lot of different resources. And I think that's a lot of thing too. A lot of survivors call and they just, are like, what can you help with? What can we do? And especially if it has been a long time, where they're like, maybe the timeline for reporting is kind of out of the situation, or maybe they tried to report. And so maybe we can kind of go a little bit.
No, you're reading my mind. Let's definitely go there. So let's say I do call up the Rape Recovery Center at Utah. What kinds of things are you going to be able to offer? What kinds of resources do you have, et cetera?
Yeah. And then also, I did want to also touch on too, we emphasize that we are 100% confidential. We are a free resource. You will not have to pay anything to us. We don't bill anything for our community members. And we also try to strive for, with our survivors, that healing looks different for everybody. So one thing is, I think there's some survivors who call and maybe think, oh, they're going to try to force me to report, or maybe they're going to try to force me to go to therapy. No, we are here for you. We are here for you at where you are at. Healing looks different for everybody. So what works for one person may not work for another person. It is just so different. Every situation is different. So what we're here for is, you can call up our office to see if you want to see what our resources are. If you want to speak to an advocate, which is the group that I'm a part of, I'm on the advocacy team. So kind of what that looks like is we do different kinds of case management. So we will do what's called an intake appointment. You can call, schedule an appointment with one of our advocates. During that intake appointment, the point of it is not to go into the assault and what happened. The point is to just say, we know something happened to you. We believe you. How can we help you? Why are you here? And we get a lot of people who call maybe because they want mental health services. Maybe they need help applying for crime victims reparation, which is something that Utah provides when you do report an assault. Maybe they are having a hard time because the person who assaulted them, maybe they're not safe to go home. Maybe they need housing assistance. We just give them tons of referrals. We have different partners that we work through in the community that we can refer to. So we do that as well. We do offer healing and support groups. So what that looks like too is we have a therapy staff, and I keep saying therapy. We do have a clinical staff as well of therapists who can offer different survivors therapy, so trauma therapy. So what that kind of looks like is we do try to reserve those for the individuals who may not have insurance. We try to work through your insurance first. But if you're having a hard time finding therapy, we have therapists on staff that can work with you, and we can get you in and to speak with a therapist, start working through with a therapist through this trauma. And also our therapy staff does clinical support groups. And then our advocacy team does standard what's called connection support groups, where kind of basically what that looks like is, again, we can't offer therapy, but what we can do is we can go through the different coping skills. We can kind of just go through and do a check-in of making sure that, we give like a presentation of kind of what can we work on? What are the things that you're, needing help with? And then again, supporting if more further steps than giving you those additional resources. But we have people who come and they can just, be in that space where they can talk to survivors who are going through what they're going through or going through something similar. We do prevention workshops. So we go and speak to schools, we go and speak to different organizations, businesses, and then again, community education. And then we do a lot of outreach events. So I know that's a lot. So I kind of threw a lot out there.
Yeah. Let me just kind of repeat a few things. It does sound like you have a clinical branch, or I guess like arm of the Rape Recovery Center. And so those clinicians would be able to offer clinical services such as therapy, including group therapy. But then as a recovery center as a whole, with some of you who are not clinicians, but who are advocates, you might offer some of these like support educational groups. It sounds like that people can come and, I don't know, meet other people who've been through something similar and also get resources and ideas from you all. Is that fair?
That is fair. And one thing I also want to make sure I mention is all of our services we offer both virtual and in person. So at the Salt Lake office, Monday through Friday, you can come see somebody in person. But if you prefer, if it's easier for your schedule, can't get to our office, we do have virtual options, which a lot of survivors really take advantage of as well. And then in our Tooele office, currently we are still growing our Tooele office, but on Thursdays we have in-person client appointments, as well as that's when we do our support groups is on Thursdays as well.
Do you serve the state as a whole, or if you're like down in St. George or like up in Logan, there are more local types of similar centers?
Yeah, great question. So our counties, our Salt Lake and Tooele County is where we serve. But again, we will not necessarily turn anybody away if they're having a hard time accessing information. But what we will try to do is say, here's the resources that are physically in person with you that you can go and see. But we try not to turn anybody away. We try to make sure you're taken care of if you're calling our center.
Okay. So I think that's important for the public to know, is that they can call, and even if you're going to just give them resources, you will be able to give them resources. What about legal ideas of what they can do legally, or if they do want help reporting to authorities? Are those services that you either refer out or help with?
We do. And so great question. So we have clients, especially it's just so much as you know, too, with victims of sexual assault where, they're having a hard time just getting the courage even to admit what's going to happen to them, think about even reporting, and having to deal with, going and doing an examination, going possibly and doing a rape kit at the hospital. And then on top of it, thinking if I want to report, I have to speak to the police, I have to tell my story. And it's just a lot. So we do, we try to accompany them at different times when we can so this role of an advocate is we're there to be just the emotional support. So we can say, here's the people who you can contact if you have any questions. Here's the legal office, but we don't give legal advice because that's just out of our depth. But we do say, here's who you can contact. here's who we will call with you if you want. We will, and then we check in with them. So another thing I want to also point out is we do short-term advocacy. So we try to make sure that we are trying to give that empowerment to our survivors. So what that means is we usually have our intake session, we'll do a follow-up, maybe a couple follow-ups, but our goal is to just be saying, you're in good hands. We want to make sure you're in good hands, and we will stay with you until you are in good hands. And if you're also staying with us through connections, awesome. Through our support groups, great. But our goal is to make sure that you know how to get your empowerment back, because we can't answer that. Our survivors can say that for us and say, here's what I need. And then we make sure that they are taken care of and that they're in good hands and that they have some of that empowerment back is the goal.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like you're taking obviously a very trauma-informed approach, because so much of what happens when you're a victim is the loss of control. And so it sounds like you're trying to, from a very early standpoint, say, hey, you have control over this, and we are here to help you. Now, some people may call and be very flustered or may not know exactly what they want. I'm guessing you have maybe a series of questions or types of things to at least help them start thinking about what they might want the next steps to be.
Yes, we do. We have, and that's the other reason why we make sure we do an actual appointment and that we schedule an appointment rather than just a quick phone call. And just, we want to make sure that we go through the intake questions and exactly for what you said, because there's a lot of times we have survivors who call and maybe they know why they're calling. Maybe they just were referred to by their therapist, or, they came across our website and they just want to know information. So we do go through a lot of questions that kind of raise, oh, I didn't know about that. I didn't know that the state of Utah will help me with this or that. We also, one thing I wanted to mention too, is we do a court accompaniment too. That's another big thing. It's really a lot when survivors are going to court, especially if they're having to face their abuser. So again, we try to make sure that we are being there as that emotional support of saying, again, you're not alone, because there's lots of survivors who come and they maybe haven't told anybody else. Maybe we're the first people that they have even had the courage to even tell. So while we're going through those questions, it really just kind of helps make sure that we are covering all aspects. We let them know too that you'd let us know if this is too much. You do not have to also share everything too. If you're uncomfortable with answering this, we can move on. We try to make sure that the survivors are feeling like they're in control, that trying to give them that power. And you're right, it is, our whole thing is trauma informed. We are very trauma centered. We are not, like I said, we are 100% confidential. We are not affiliated necessarily with the police department, but we work with them. We do work on different cases. And for example, for me, I help run our sexual assault response team. So on that team is, from the very, very beginning, when a survivor is coming and reporting an assault, especially a lot of times they'll go to the hospital room to get the rape kit done, all the way through until trial, or they, are going through that whole process. So we do work with attorneys, we do work with the police officers, and it's all very trauma informed. And that's all of our trainings. That's one thing that we are definitely doing more and more in Utah. And that is, the Start by Believing campaign. We are just all about, again, we believe the survivors, and it is all about making sure that we are giving these survivors trauma informed services.
You mentioned earlier crime reparations in the state of Utah. Are you able to talk a little bit about that? I know that's not what you offer, that's the state of Utah, but are you able to inform the public a little bit about what that is?
Well, it's something that, we do help with if it's something that they are wanting to know. So basically it's crime victims reparation, so that the state of Utah will help pay for, different, and it just varies of what, and I can't necessarily promise or say what the state necessarily would be able to help provide, but just different, like maybe housing assistance, or, just kind of if they have reported a crime, that they would be able to get help from the state to kind of get back on their feet. But they go and view that online. We help them with the application process. But there's also victim advocates who work at the police departments too. So usually when a lot of survivors, they kind of hear about it when they're going to report, but sometimes they don't. And sometimes when they call us, we're like, oh, they didn't mention that to you. Let's go through that. And we just kind of walk them through that process.
Okay. Yeah, I believe that at our clinic, we have received every now and then, some checks from that department for therapy services, right? So that's one thing they may cover Not always, but sometimes they do. Okay.
Oh, sorry. With that too, they will cover also the rape kit too. So one thing that we get a lot from survivors is they think if I go to get a rape kit done, that I will have to be the one to help pay. No, that's covered. They also can do STD testing. So, they go through and the nurses are really good at explaining, this is what is offered. Here's what the state will provide. So again, we try to make sure that with Utah that these survivors are being taken care of as much as they can.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. One question I had too is, are your services only for people 18 and up, or what if somebody calls who's 16 or 15 or 17?
Yes, we serve ages 14 and up. So we do not serve under 14. We serve in that 14 and older stage. So anybody under 14 would go to the Children's Justice Center and work with them. But yeah, during that and in that 14 and 18 period where they're still technically, they're not technically adults yet, it just kind of depends on the situation of what they would prefer. But we do, 14 and up is who we serve.
Okay. And how does that change the confidentiality clauses in the sense of mandated reporting and needing to share with other? Because I'm guessing some 15-year-olds may not want to tell their parents or are scared or don't want other people to know or don't want to report to the police. So how does that all get more complicated when they're underage?
Yes, great question. So we do make sure that before any intake we have, before any time we are giving any services, we let them know in the state of Utah, but everybody in the state of Utah are mandatory reporters, and that is, children under 18. And so it just also kind of varies. So we just let them know, say, depending on what you let us know, we are mandatory reporters. So then we ask them, are you okay with proceeding? What do you want to share? What are you, are you interested in? So it just depends. There's certain criteria that we have to meet of what we know before we even make a report, because especially like if we're just making reports with anybody under 18 and we don't really have enough information, we do have to have a certain amount of information before we do actually make the report. But we always make sure that our clients know, and they are always signing a consent form as well at the very beginning. So we go through that, make sure they understand what it is. And that's part of it, is making sure that we let them know that we are mandatory reporters.
Okay. Before we got on the actual interview, you were mentioning that the numbers in Tooele are actually worse than the numbers in Salt Lake City, which again might go against people's ideas of, this big cities is where kind of more dangerous things can happen, or there's more people per se, or whatever those myths are. So what's happening in Tooele in particular, in Tooele County?
It has been surprising. Again, I've only been here 3 years, but in the 3 years, and everywhere in Utah, it's growing like crazy. So even though Utah and Tooele especially is growing, again, we are small, but when we look at the stats, we are the top 3, if not the top. I don't know. I'll have to double check the numbers as of late. But in Tooele County, we are leading, unfortunately, when it comes to sexual assault with all of Utah, one of the top counties in all of Utah. So let me go into, I do have a little bit of numbers right here too, and specifically when it does talk about Tooele, but the national rate of reported rape is 42.5 per 100,000. And then among the highest rates of reported rape in the county, Utah is 59.5 per 100,000. And then in Tooele County, we are 110.7 per 100,000. So that's more than double the national average in Tooele County. It's an estimated of 73% of rape or sexual assaults in Salt Lake County are not reported. So that's another thing. And I know that's a huge thing in Tooele too. There's a lot of mistrust in the justice system, which is also understandable. There's a lot of mistrust with when it comes to just, the different organizations, and feeling like there's a lot of feeling in Tooele County that people will not believe them. Victims who have come forward, there's been, they haven't received necessarily the best feedback also from the community. So there's I think just a lot of mistrust that's going on. And a lot of, again, like we were talking about earlier, that misinformation. And I think when it comes to, like you were saying, I think in Tooele especially, we did a needs assessment that the University of Utah did for us last year, where they came out and did a survey in the Tooele County. And a lot of what we saw from that was kind of what we just discussed, where it's kind of this mentality of, we're a small town that happens in a big city, like dangerous neighborhood. We're a small town this doesn't happen in our backyard. We're safe. And again, I think it's that lack of knowledge of understanding that it's not the man in the bushes, the stranger that's happening. That does happen, but the percentage is much higher when it comes to people we know and people that we trust. So there's a lot of that going on in the community. There's a lot of, especially when minority groups who feel like there's not resources for them either. So there's just, it's a lot. There's a lot of not knowing where to go. And then again, a lot of misinformation and false assumptions, I think, being made in Tooele County right now.
So lots of things are going through my brain right now as you mentioned these numbers. If you say there's 42 accounts of rape, I'm assuming you're saying per 100,000 people.
Yes.
But then earlier you're telling me there's 1 in 3 women or 1 in 6 men who are having unwanted sexual encounters. Even that is a very low number of reporting then. It's
Yes.
not that 42 cases of unwanted exposure are happening, is that that's the amount that's getting reported.
Yes.
And that trends to be a national trend as well, right? That the amount of, like when you go ahead and survey people anonymously, that's usually when we get this 1 in 3 and 1 in 6.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at the actual police reports and actual, like, okay, we're going to actually make a case about this, that lowers exponentially because people just don't want to go through the hassle or not prepared to disclose, or for many people it happened to them when they were little, and so now that they're adults they just figure why even bother. Or maybe, like you're saying, the statutes of limitation depending on the state also make a difference as to whether or not people can report post the initial traumatic response, which can be years for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So at the same time, I don't want to minimize that we've got more than double of that in Tooele County. So that's very interesting. And of course, Utah being higher. Are there any reasons or any research that has gone into explaining why Utah might be higher, or even Tooele County in particular? What makes us unique or different?
Yeah, there's a lot of research on it. And I think what I always come back to is prevention. I don't think we do enough prevention talk. There's a lot also of, again, like I spoke about earlier, it's just kind of this assumption of we're a safe small town, we're teaching our kids, in Utah, when we talk about the education system, we're still teaching abstinence only when it comes to the school systems, right? So we're not really kind of going into, well, what happens if, what else can happen? There's not enough information about when it comes to sex of talking about, again, consent. We don't talk enough about that whatsoever, of what that looks like, boundaries, healthy relationships. And again, like what happens, what you should do if you do experience any kind of sexual assault. And again, like we spoke about, what does sexual assault even mean? We're just not being educated enough, I think, is what's happening a lot in Utah. I will say too, especially in Tooele County, there is a little bit of the fear of, if you do report, not just going through the process of that, but also when you're in a small town, if you go and you speak to somebody, even just at the police department, it could be your aunt's best friend. It could be, so there's a lot also of the small town gossip has been a lot of reserving in Tooele County, especially of not wanting to report, not wanting to speak up. And there's also been cases where people who have spoken up didn't feel like they were really taken care of enough and again, not really knowing of the resources. So again, education, prevention, and again, just letting people know that there is confidential resources and that people are believing, and that we are now moving into this new movement of trauma-informed services with all these different organizations, and that is increasing. So we're hoping with the increase of that to start hopefully seeing these numbers start going down and seeing that people will actually feel comfortable reporting, and just trying to make sure that survivors know, again, we believe you and we're here for you.
Okay, so it sounds like there's some thought that the lack of comprehensive sexual education at large in the state of Utah, abstinence-based only approaches are not helping with this. Plus, abstinence-based approaches also don't really focus on consent and relational aspects of sexuality either. It tends to be very reproductive and only reproductive focused instead of relational focused. I think too, like one of the things that is very common, especially because I want to return to the statistic of 8 and 10 sexual assaults happen with somebody that a person knows versus like this kind of stranger danger idea, that in smaller communities or religious communities, it trends to be the case that a lot of perpetrators, quite frankly, are seen as revered people within the family system or the community system. And so this idea of not being believed is something that I've heard in all kinds of spaces I've lived in, where, if the perpetrator is a church leader or a grandparent who's been in the community forever and everybody knows them and they do business within the community, it's difficult then for people to believe that this picture that they have of an idealized member of their society could do something as heinous, or difficult as something like this. Is that trending as well with what you're finding?
Unfortunately, it really is. And I know, especially when you talk about like there's positions of power, right? So when you get into that dynamic, and especially, you do see this a lot with religious communities, it can happen also in the school systems, a teacher, and kind of where this, again, when you're not taught about consent, sexual assault, you're not speaking about it either in your school, at your home. It can get really easily muddy where a lot of victims too, there is a lot that survivors talk about where they have that shame built in and they blame themselves too. So that's a huge aspect of it as well is, was I asking for this? Did I do something to provoke this? And a lot of predators are really good about, especially if they're in that positions of power, of kind of turning it into, well, how did this happen? Did you want it? Did you, just kind of, again, a lot of this myth of, well, they didn't say no, and therefore that's what consent is, and again, a lot of survivors really have a little bit of that guilt and shame. We talk a lot about, with trauma when it comes to the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response. You get a lot of fawning of the niceties. We talk a lot about when it comes to prevention, kind of the nice person syndrome, right? Where and I can really relate to this as a person, just trying to be a little bit of a pleaser, wanting to make sure everybody's feeling comfortable, and kind of being in that position where you're not feeling comfortable, but you don't really, your brain's kind of trying to tell you, well, this person, especially if they're in a position of power, or I'm being told it's okay, or they're somehow explaining to me that it's my fault. Again, one thing that we want to make sure that we emphasize is it's never the victim's fault. It doesn't matter. It is always the perpetrator's fault. It doesn't matter. It is never their fault. This is not something that that the victim should ever feel like they asked for. Nobody would ask for this, and it is always the perpetrator's fault. So yeah, kind of going into those complexities of, especially when it comes to religious institutions where it's, again, you got a lot of shame, you're not talking about this. We are seeing that for sure in Utah, unfortunately. And again, the biggest thing to combat that is to quit being silent and start talking about it, and not be ashamed of talking about these themes, talking about these words, using these words that we naturally feel uncomfortable to, which is also understandable. It's not a fun topic. They're not fun things to go into, but if we keep being silent about it, people are not going to feel like they can come out and just talk about it.
Yeah, for sure. Has your organization tried to make any outreach to particular especially religious organizations like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or the Catholic Church or the Unitarian Church? Like, are you trying to make any types of outreach to different community religious entities in the area?
Absolutely. And we do have some positive responses. One thing that especially in my position out here in Tooele, I will say I have noticed a lot in the community, and I guess a little bit before, to answer that question, to go back a little bit to the education. I went and spoke to the school board, and there is a lot of people who are really, you can just tell they're craving it, and they're saying, something's got to change. We got to do something different. I have spoken to teachers, I have spoken to, but mostly people in the community who are just really wanting to change. And that also goes with religion institutions as well. So and one thing we always try to make sure people know too is again, going back to our outreach, we do workshops and we work with different groups, and that does include religious organizations if they so choose. As far as making it to a higher level, that's not necessarily my field, but it's definitely something that we are always trying to work for. We're trying to work with legislation. We're always trying to make sure that we are promoting exactly what we're talking about of empowering survivors, believing them, and again, talking about prevention and again, just being loud and speaking out.
Yeah. So I was recently interviewed for a podcast called architectureofabuse.com. And it is LDS specific, really addressing, the crisis that we have within our LDS community in particular. And one of the things that they're consistently bringing up from kind of a legal, educational, I guess, awareness space is that oftentimes in religious communities, and I know that this is true not just of LDS land, I know just through my research of religious communities, is that many people will go first to a pastor, a bishop, a priest, a rabbi versus authorities, right? Or calling the police. Like they'll search spiritual help first. And then, of course, there's all kinds of issues there because depending on which religion we're talking about and how those people are particularly trained to get people help. But since we are kind of in an LDS adjacent geography, what do you have anything to say about what you wish LDS leaders knew, or how they were trained, or how they could use your recovery center as a resource versus, or even maybe if you want to speak to some of the issues that you're all very aware of that happen where reporting stays within the system instead of getting to the appropriate authorities?
Yeah.
That's a very messy question.
No, it's just I'm trying to see what rabbit holes are appropriate to go down for me. Um, no, I to answer your question, I think unfortunately it is something we see too common with survivors where they did talk to a bishop. And again, like we're speaking in the LDS land, especially in Utah, it is something where bishops, unfortunately, their training is just with working at the Rape Recovery Center, we have to do the 40-hour UCASA training, which goes into trauma specifically. So it's a requirement even for people who are volunteering with our organization. It's something I have to do. Oh, sorry.
Let me just stop there for a second. I want to just really amplify this. You were telling me that just as a volunteer at this organization, you had to do 40 hours of trauma-informed UCASA training. Do you want to explain what UCASA training is? I'm not sure everybody would know what that means.
Yeah. So, so basically what UCASA is the Utah Coalition Against Sexual Assault. So it is an organization. When I was a volunteer at the police department, even with the police, I had to go through it. So it wasn't a job, it was a volunteer organization. So what the Utah Coalition Against Sexual Assault does is that they offer the training where it can be to, again, volunteers, but it's a 40-hour program that goes specifically into trauma. So it goes through a wide spectrum of range where we do talk about different communities that we will encounter and just how to make sure that we are giving that trauma-informed response and also how to deal with somebody who's in crisis. Because, we've talked a little bit about survivors who may call up and their abuse happened years ago. Well, we get callers who it happened maybe that day. We have our mobile response team who go out and they work 24 hours and they go any time of the day, any day of the week. And they're the ones who respond to the hospitals and who are there with the victims when they are going through and doing the rape kit. So kind of going with that, we need to make sure that we are able to handle people in a crisis moment. So UCASA is the organization that provides that training. They provide all the different resources for Utah when it comes to there's just a lot of resources that you can go to when you go to UCASA for the community, but also for people who are dealing with anybody who is dealing with trauma of any kind. And yeah, to kind of answer your question, that is one thing that I have thought about. And I know, we would love to see more people of is just being more trained, especially if you're that first point of contact in any kind of organization, that you would know how to handle somebody who has been abuse of any kind, especially with religious organizations and the LDS Church. It is all a volunteer program, right? So you get people who go on there who it's not their job. Maybe they are, in real life, they are an eye doctor, for example, which is what I had. But, that it's somebody who this isn't their job, this isn't their profession. And then they have people who are coming in and treating them probably like a therapist, treating them like that first responder, and not knowing kind of really what to say. It's a lot to put on individuals, and especially volunteers. If you're volunteering for something in your community and your organization, generally are usually a person who cares and you want to be able to provide help. But it's a lot to put on somebody when they don't have the access to those trainings. So with that training, it's just making sure to, when somebody is dealing with a crisis, especially if you're not a therapist, especially when this is not your job, you're not a clinician, and you do want to help, it's saying, okay, how can I make sure that this person is taken care of with me in the moment, but also how can I make sure they get the resources that they need? Where can I point them to? And, who are the people that I can make sure that they are in contact with? And especially you're going to get people who are from organizations maybe you disagree with, maybe, and making sure that you are taking your personal feelings out of it and still being there for that person too as well. So again, I don't know that I was trying to say on topic with that, but there was a lot I was trying to tap into with that. I don't know if that answered your question is basically what I'm saying.
No, for sure. I mean, I think so. I mean, the thing I think that I want to just raise awareness to is that, you're speaking of taking volunteer training very seriously. 40 hours of any type of training is no joke. That's quite a bit of time. And this is trauma-informed specific and sexual assault specific. And my understanding is that folks who are within the LDS framework are not getting anywhere near, if any, training in regards to trauma and or how sexual assault may show up either in confessionals or in young men's and young women's programs or even in primary programs. Just people are just really lacking those kinds of skills or know-how. So that's concerning. And then I think back to some of the things that we were talking about before, in any organization or religious entity in particular, I think people just assume everybody's good and everybody's great and everybody's Christ-like or whatever the language is of that particular denomination. And so it's hard to imagine that sexual abuse is happening within the corridors of the LDS home or LDS congregation. And yet it is. And that's another kind of quote unquote ugly that we need to just address more. It happens in all communities, right? So for us to pretend that we are super special actually puts people and victims into more danger because, like you said, we don't have the language to talk about this, or maybe people aren't believed. I think another thing that happens oftentimes in religious communities is this kind of call to forgive or call to repentance, or these kinds of kind of more spiritual tools to deal with some of these issues, when in reality people need clinical tools or even criminal accountability, versus spiritual accountability through a repentance process of sorts. And this, I think, has been shown to be problematic with the LDS Church in particular. It really stops being just kind of like, oops, we just didn't think about it, when they have like legal teams put together to actually discourage reporting. And here in Utah, of course, we have the clergy exception to mandatory reporting, which used to be the case in all 50 states and really has fallen out of favor in most states. But Utah clings to this clergy exception so that if somebody is confessing to a sexual crime of a minor, the bishop or the stake president in LDS language does not need to report. So there's some systemic issues here, I think, that we all have to be pretty aware of and not just assume it's, we didn't know or didn't realize.
Absolutely. And I think part of to go back to that 40-hour training, the great thing about that training that I remember when I took it and I was kind of getting out of it and kind of entering into the world of advocacy is you got to make sure you understand you got to understand what your role is in your lane, you know? So one thing is I'm an advocate. Again, like I always say, I'm not a clinician. I am not a therapist. I can't give therapy advice. I am not a police officer. I can't give police advice. I'm not an attorney. I can't give attorney advice. And I think that's something that goes into with, again, like the religious community as well. Know that your lane is your spiritual help for your, members. But there is other help. There's mental health help. There is, making sure that there's letting individuals know of what their resources are, letting them know, okay, if you do want to report, who are you going to call? Especially again, talking about in Tooele, it's not hard to kind of know who's the victim advocate that you can call, whether it's at the Rape Recovery Center, whether it's at the advocates that work for the police department, and kind of just knowing that, again, what is your lane? And making sure you're staying in that lane, and making sure then that you know who the appropriate lanes are of where to refer individuals when they are coming to you in that moment. And again, kind of understanding what trauma is, and like we spoke about earlier, what sexual assault actually is. I think there is a lot of misunderstanding with that too when it comes to people may have told their bishop, they may have told their clergyman, and they may have dismissed it because they didn't think it necessarily constituted sexual assault, or maybe they just thought it's not, maybe somebody there's no need to go report it, or, and again, those assumptions that we're trying to make sure get educated and really understand. And then again, stay in your lane and report to the appropriate lanes, or give the individual the access and the referrals to the appropriate lanes, and make sure they're aware of what their choices are.
Okay. I know we're nearing the end of our time together. Is there anything that I'm not asking you, or that you were hoping to be able to communicate to the public about your center that I just haven't made it to yet?
I mean, I don't think so. There's so much to cover, obviously, about this topic, but basically, just wanting to make sure that, again, as what I'm trying to do, especially out in Tooele, is just raise the public awareness of education. A lot of times when we go out and we do these tabling events, or we go and we do speak to the community, a lot of what I hear lately has been, well, what can we do? How can we help? And especially it can get discouraging, as we all know, when you're trying to go through, the top, right? So if you're trying to go through government, or you're trying to change, the big, like we talked about, the systematic issues, which is always great. And we always want to advocate, and we're always wanting to still work at that. But what can you do as an individual, I think, is kind of the best place to kind of know where to start and say, okay, otherwise it can get discouraging, right? It can discouraging seeing these numbers every year kind of consistently remain the same and not really change. But one thing that, again, we're trying to let the community know is that, there is a lot of what you can do. And a lot of what you can do is, first of all, educate yourself. Make sure you are paying attention, whether you're a parent, whether you are a friend, a partner, a coworker, whatever it is. Because again, when we see these numbers, it's a good chance that you've been impacted. And if you haven't, somebody very closely has been impacted if you're in Utah. So again, trying to stress to the community that education is important, making sure that we understand prevention when it comes to sexual assault, what that looks like, what the experts are saying, and what that means of how these communications should be happening in our homes, with our, in our communities and the rooms that we occupy, and again, for the survivors, letting them know that you are believed, and that there is a safe space, and that in Utah, we are really working towards that trauma-informed and victim-centered approach to make sure that victims feel empowered and that they feel safe. And so we can reduce these numbers, and so we can have our communities just be more aware that these are issues, and that what we've been doing, things need to change, because these numbers are staying high because nothing is really changing. And we need to just do something and start speaking out about it. Yeah.
Okay. It looks like, looking through your website too, you have resources for friends and family who want to help in knowing how to support a victim of sexual assault.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important, because sometimes it's like you're the parent, or you're the friend, or you're the partner, but you're not really sure how to help or how to support. And you also have, of course, volunteer and donor information. You're a nonprofit. I'm guessing you run through fundraising. So if you happen to be listening and you're looking for a space to make a local difference, if you happen to live in Utah, the Rape Recovery Center could sure use your donations, or your volunteer energy.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, to kind of just second what you just said, and we help primary and secondary survivors. So yeah, I really want to highlight that. Thank you for bringing that up because we do get a lot of people too who call up and say, I have a loved one and I just don't know what to say, which is also so normal. Who's prepared for knowing how to, really talk about these things? And it's unfortunate that we do need to be prepared. It's unfortunate that we do need to have these conversations, but they're important. So we get a lot of people who and there's a lot of individuals too who, their first instinct is, I want to fix it, or I have the answers, or I know what you should do, even though I haven't gone through this, which is normal. But we try to make sure that we give resources to individuals to say, you listen, first of all, sit there and listen, ask them what they need. Believe them also. Make sure you are, we talk about the Start by Believing campaign, where start by believing. Don't start by assuming. Don't start by blaming. Don't start by feeling like you need to be the expert. Just start by believing and listen to them. Listen and hear and try to, and then again, educate yourself as well. One more thing I did want to mention that I don't think we touched on was we do have our PREA program, which is our Prison Rape Elimination Act. So we have on our team a PREA program where we have advocates who will go out to the prisons, to the jails in Utah, and will actually help incarcerated survivors who may have experienced sexual assault, whether they've been in the system, whether it was something that happened to them before. But that's something that we do, that we go out and I got to go and tour the Utah State Prison and meet with the people who run it. And it's just, yeah, there's a lot that Utah is trying to do and trying to make sure that we are being more loud about this and being more in the areas that are of need in Utah. Because again, like we keep saying, it's everywhere. Unfortunately, it's everywhere.
And it sounds like if there was a stake president or a bishop or a relief society president who wanted to call and see if there would be somebody who could come in and give a fireside presentation or a Fifth Sunday presentation or something along those lines, you would be able and willing to help with something like that.
Absolutely. One thing I want to make sure I mention too with that. So we do have different workshops, different presentations that we give. We also are very flexible with whoever we are working with. So for example, if we are meeting with, whether it's a religious institution or whether we're meeting with a school, we have different organizations who have said, we would love to hear you talk about prevention, but we don't want to hear rape. We don't want sex spoken about. Now we can kind of say, well, we'd recommend that we still, again, we don't want to shy away from it. However, we also understand that you got to ease into some of these conversations, right? So we always want to work with individuals and say, okay, we can then focus more on boundaries. We can focus more on what consent looks like with healthy relationships. So we can work with different organizations and say, okay, well, how can we work with you? What is it that you feel like maybe you're not ready for, or you feel like is maybe not appropriate for the setting? Well, we have plenty of presentations that are appropriate for whatever setting it is that you are wanting to, whatever your organization is.
Yeah, well, and even earlier when you were talking about, people who don't know what to say or do, or even organizations that don't really want to address this. But if you don't know somebody who's been sexually assaulted, I would say it's not that you don't know somebody, it's that nobody has ever talked to you about it.
Yeah.
And that might be a question to ask yourself. If this has been a very rare occurrence where you know of somebody in your life who's had sexual assault, what is it about me that is making it difficult for people in my family or people in my friend group or people in my community to open up about what has happened? I think sometimes, especially if you're kind of like maybe an older man in the family, right? You're like, what are you talking about? It's like, well, why is it maybe that it's been hard to talk to you in particular about these kinds of issues? So that's a way we can all self-reflect as well, is how safe am I to be able to bring these topics up to?
Yeah.
I think it's also a good question for us to consider, what are my facial reactions like? What are the first things I say or do? Have I minimized somebody's experience? Has there been a family member that I've said, you're exaggerating, or you're being, you're seeking attention, or you're not, I don't believe you? Is there repair that needs to be made? So those are all kind of some relational things I would encourage people to think about. But I can't thank you enough for your time and for everything that you're doing personally, but also your organization is doing to try to help the healing process and also the prevention process in the state of Utah. I think I just want to call out that the national organization, that's very helpful for a lot of people. It's called RAINN, RAINN, and their website is very easy. It's rainn.org. And that's the National Sexual Assault Hotline, which also offers confidential 24/7 support. And then you have the Rape Recovery Center here in Salt Lake. And is there anything else you want to share before we end as far as?
Another resource I was going to mention as well, so was the Utah 24-hour helpline. So that I'll give that number as well, 801-736-4356. You can call at any point and speak to somebody who can help you right away, and again, be there. Because again, like we at the Rape Recovery Center, we are 9 to 5. We do have our mobile response team that's 24/7. But yeah, just in those after hours, there's still help. And again, we also, any organization who wants to work with us, we have prevention resources or flyers that we can always help distribute, that we are always happy to give out. So yeah, what I always just kind of tell people too is just check out our website, explore it. There's so much. It really is a lot of resources that we are trying to provide, and just give us a call if you don't know what you are wanting help with, but you feel like, I know I need help in something with this topic, just give us a call. We can point you in the right direction.
Okay. And your website is raperecoverycenter.org. And that's
Correct.
how people can contact you or your association. Yes?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jennilyn, so much for your time. And I wish you the best. This is difficult, but very rewarding work to be involved with. So thank you for all of your energies that you expend in our community.
Oh, back at you, Natasha. Thank you so much. Pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional Facebook page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. You can also find all her cool resources at natashahelfer.com. The information shared on this program is informational and should not be considered therapy. This podcast addresses many topics around mental health and sexuality and may not be suitable for minors. Some topics may elicit a trigger or emotional response, so please care for yourself accordingly. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or feelings of Natasha Helfer or the Natasha Helfer Podcast. We provide a platform for open and diverse discussions, and it is important to recognize that different perspectives may be shared. We encourage our listeners to engage in critical thinking and form their own opinions. The intro and outro music for these episodes is by Otter Creek. Thank you for listening.
There is a place where time slows to nature's pace, and there is space there to find yourself in her embrace. Some places should be left alone. Now say the Navajo, so we can always go to the homeland of the heart. 10,000 years of our human history etched on her canyon walls, alongside Earth's mysteries. Some places should be left alone. Say the Navajo, so we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart. The sleep in our cities. We sleep without her stars, yet still her presence sustains us from afar. Some places should be left alone. No, dish